Good morning, grade 6. It's the start of the new year, 2021. We're starting with lesson 6-5. And if you look at your assignment a little bit later on, you'll see that there's actually two types of problems that they want you to solve. In the first section, they want you to come up with something called multiplicative inverses. And then in the second section, they want you to solve some equations. So we're going to work on two different kinds of problems here. Hopefully this will get you squared away on this. Now, the first concept, what in the world is a multiplicative inverse, or it's also called a reciprocal? So I'm going to write that down here. Multiplicative inverse, otherwise known as a reciprocal. They're the same thing. They mean the same thing. Basically, the definition, if you look on page 258, the definition is there, page 258. It says that multiplicative inverses are two numbers that when you multiply them together, you get the number 1. Let me give you an example of that. If I wrote on the board the fraction 2/5, what number could I multiply 2/5 by to get to the number 1? 2/5 times what number would get me to the number 1? The answer to that is just flipping these two numbers. 2 times 5 is 10. 5 times 2 is 10. I get 10 over 10, which is the number 1. Therefore, in the world of math, we say that 2/5 and 5/2 are reciprocals or are multiplicative inverses. Let's do it again with a different set of numbers. If I wrote the number 2/11 and I said to you, what number can I multiply 2/11 by to get me to the number 1? Just flip the numbers. The multiplicative reciprocal, multiplicative inverse, or the reciprocal would give me 22 over 22, which simplifies down to 1. So this number and this number are reciprocals or are multiplicative inverses. Okay? Do you notice how easy this is when they're fractions? All you got to do is flip the numbers and you get the reciprocal, or you get the multiplicative inverse. Let's try it with some numbers up here on the board. Can you tell me what the multiplicative reciprocal of 3/7 is? If you said 7/3, you would be right. Now, notice I'm not putting an equal sign here. I'm putting an arrow because 3/7 is not equal to 7/3. We're just trying to find the reciprocal. What would the reciprocal of -4/11 be? Well, wouldn't that be -11/4? Because if I multiply these two together, I would get the number 1. So the reciprocal of -4/11 is -11/4. How about this one right here? Wouldn't it be 2/7? Right? 2/7? That would be its reciprocal. How about for this one? Wouldn't it be 5/9? All I'm doing is flipping the fractions. But then all of a sudden, what about this? That's not a fraction. How do I find its reciprocal? Well, let's turn it into a fraction. Isn't -5 rather, the same thing as the fraction -5/1? And now that we have it in a fraction form, can't we write its reciprocal as -1/5? So all I did is change the whole number, -5, into -5/1, and then flip the numbers to get the reciprocal of -1/5. How about this one? Well, isn't 8 the same thing as the fraction 8/1? And therefore, isn't its reciprocal 1/8? Next one's a little bit trickier, but it shouldn't be too hard at all. Right now, we've got a mixed number. It's got the big number, the base number of -15 and a fraction of 2/3. What if I change this into a fraction? Do you remember how to do that? Way back in December, we talked about that. This small number, 3, times the -15 plus the 2. 3 times negative 15 is negative 45, plus 2 is negative 47 over the same denominator of 3. And we'll get rid of this because we don't need that anymore. And since this equals that, therefore the reciprocal would be negative 3 over 47, wouldn't it? Negative 3 over 47. Let's try it with this next one. 2 times 17 is 34. 34 plus 1 is 35 over 2, right? 35 over 2, so the reciprocal would be 2 over 35. How about this next one? 9 times 4 is 36. 36 plus 1 is 37 over 9. So the reciprocal would be 9 over 37, wouldn't it? And finally, this last one. 3 times 6 is 18. 18 plus 1 is 19 thirds. This and this are the same number. What's the reciprocal of that? Wouldn't it be 3 over 19? You got it. Now, that's the first half of the lesson, making sure we understand how to make reciprocals or multiplicative inverses of other numbers. Remember, the definition according to 258 is that they are two numbers that can multiply together to make the number 1. So, for example, right here, if I would take 6 1/3 and if I would multiply it by 3 over 19, I'd get the number 1. That's the nature of reciprocals, or multiplicative inverses. Now, the next part of this is, how do we solve these equations that they want us to solve? It's really not too bad. Really not too bad. Let's look at this problem. Notice it's got an equal sign right here, and it's got x divided by 10 on one side, on the left side, and it's got this 3 on the right-hand side. If I want to get x by itself, so that I know what x equals, I'm going to have to do the opposite of multiplying by 10. I'm sorry, the opposite of dividing by 10. What's the opposite of dividing by 10? Isn't that multiplying by 10? And don't I need to do this to both sides of the equation? We did this already, didn't we? Don't worry, this is part of this second section is going to be pretty easy, but then a part of it is going to add a new twist to it, and we'll get to that shortly. So what do we get here? We get an x equaling 30 when we're done. Let's check it out. Let's take this 30 and put it right here. Is 30 divided by 10 equal to 3? Yes, it is. Hey, we must have done it right. Let's go to this next one. 7 equals m divided by 4. The m divided by 4 is on the right-hand side of the equation. How do I get m by itself? I'm going to do the opposite of dividing by 4, which is multiplying by 4, and we're going to do it to both sides of the equation. See that? We're multiplying by 4 on both sides, and we get 28 equaling the value of m. Let's see if it works. Let's take this 28 and put it right here. Is 28 divided by 4 equal to 7? Yes, it is. Let's move on right here. X divided by 5 equals negative 11. I think I have to multiply both sides by 5. And that gives me an x value, because these two cancel each other out, equaling a negative 55. Because negative 11 times a positive 5 is negative 55. Let's try it out. Let's take this number, stick it right here. Is negative 55 divided by 5 equal to negative 11? Yes, it is. Let's move on to the next one. Negative 8 equals x divided by 5. How are we going to get back x by itself? Let's do the opposite of dividing by 5. Let's multiply both sides by 5. Remember that? And we get negative 40 equaling our value of x here, because dividing by 5 and multiplying by 5 cancel each other out. Now let's try this negative 40 out up here. Negative 40 divided by 5. Does that equal negative 8? You bet it does. Okay, on our next problem, here's where you got to start putting your thinking caps on. Here's where we're going to add something different. What is the opposite of multiplying by 3/4? Because x is attached to this 3/4 by multiplication. Isn't the opposite of multiplying by 3/4 dividing by 3/4? So I'm going to divide 3/4 by both sides of the equation. This side, it's pretty easy. We end up with x. But this side, here's where we start using this idea of multiplicative inverses and reciprocals. Okay? In the world of math, when you're dividing by a fraction, there is a specific rule. The rule says to divide by a fraction, you multiply by the reciprocal of the second number. Remember reciprocals? We just did a bunch of problems over here on the board. Okay, so here's how this works. To divide fractions, we're going to multiply by the reciprocal of that second number. What's the reciprocal of 3/4? Isn't it 4/3? Yes, it is. So we end up with 12 times 4/3. But how do I do that? Well, remember how to do that? You're going to change 12 into 12 over 1. And I get 48 over 3 when I do the multiplication. But I can also do some simplifying. Divide by 3, divide by 3. And I get this. And so I get an x value of 16. My x in this case is 16. So say this with me. To divide, you multiply by the reciprocal of the second number. Say it again. To divide, you multiply by the reciprocal of the second number. Say it again. To divide, you multiply by the reciprocal of the second number. Say it again. To divide, you multiply by the reciprocal of the second number. Okay, let's move on. Let's try this problem right here. This one's not going to be too tough because we're not going to really have to deal with that issue of what we just talked about. But there's something else in this problem that needs to be addressed. I've got -7 equals the negative value of x divided by 6. And the question is, does the negative, notice how it's basically not pointing to the x or the 6. Which number is negative? Is the x negative? Is the 6 negative? Well, basically, the idea here is that the whole fraction has a negative value when you take that into consideration. But let's for the moment just think of it in terms of making this easy on ourselves. And let's think of this as -7, and my pen's dying. I'm going to get rid of this pen. Let's think of what we're actually going to do to solve this problem. Aren't we going to have to multiply both sides of the equation by 6 or -6, depending upon how we view this? Because the x is attached by division of 6, isn't it? So let's think about multiplying both sides of the equation by 6. And that would give us -42 over here, and it would either give us a negative x or a positive x. The question is, which one is it? Is it positive x or is it negative x? So let's think through this. Let's stick a 42 right here. If I stick 42 right here, is the negative value of 42 divided by 6 equal to -7? The answer to that is yes. So x has to be positive 42 in this case. Now, the whole fraction has a negative value, but x itself is a positive 42. Think about that. 42 divided by 6 is 7. But there's also the negative symbol that's sitting there, right? So it's really 42 divided by 6 is 7, but it's a -7, just like this one over here is. So x is 42. Let's go to this next one, where we have to apply that new idea we came up with before. What's the opposite of multiplying x by 3/5? Multiplying x by 3/5. Isn't it dividing by 3/5? And do you remember how we said we were going to divide fractions? To divide fractions, we multiply by the reciprocal of the second number. To divide fractions, we multiply by the reciprocal of the second number, right? And the third issue is, well, we're going to have to put this 6 over 1, aren't we? And when we do that, we get 30 over 3, which is an x value, an x value of 10, isn't it? Now, we could have cross-simplified. 6 divided by 3 and 3 divided by 3 would get us there faster. But remember the rule. To divide fractions, you multiply by the reciprocal of the second number. To divide fractions, you multiply by the reciprocal of the second number. Let's try this next one. What's the opposite of multiplying x by 3/7? Isn't it dividing both sides of the equation by 3/7? Now, how do we divide by 3/7? The rule says to divide, we multiply by the reciprocal of that second number, right? Over here, we're just left with x because multiplying by 3/7 and dividing by 3/7 cancel each other out. And we're going to have to put a 1 underneath the 15, aren't we? Let's do some simplifying. Divide by 3, get 1 and 5. Isn't the answer 35 equaling the value of x? I think it is. Am I still seeing that on the board? Good, I think so. Let's go to this next one. T is attached to 6/7 by multiplication. I want to get t by itself. What's the opposite of multiplying by 6/7? Isn't it dividing by 6/7? And aren't we going to do that to both sides of the equation? Right? And how do we divide fractions again? We divide fractions by multiplying by the reciprocal of that second number. Remember that? We divide fractions by multiplying by the reciprocal of the second number. And we can do some simplifying here. Divide by 6, divide by 6. And when we do that, we get an answer of 21 because 3 times 7 is 21. 3 times 7 is 21. Let's go to this next one. 7/3 times x equals 2/3. So how are we going to get x by itself? We're going to have to do the opposite of multiplying by 7/3, which is dividing by 7/3. What's our rule about dividing of fractions? To divide a fraction, we multiply by the reciprocal of the second number. Right? Over here, the 7/3 cancel each other out because multiplying by 7/3 and dividing by 7/3 are canceling ideas. Here we can do some simplifying. Divide by 3, and we get an x value of 2/7 when we're all done. Can't read that though, because the line got in the way. X equals 2/7. Okay, let's try another one. Way down here. H is attached to 3/4 by multiplication. What's the opposite of multiplying by 3/4? Isn't it dividing by 3/4? Yep, it is. So we're going to divide both sides of the equation by 3/4. On this side, they cancel each other out, leaving me with just x. Multiplying by 3/4 and dividing by 3/4 cancel each other out. Over here, what's the rule about the division of fractions? To divide, we multiply by the reciprocal of just that second number. Hey, can we do any simplifying here? Yep. Divide by 4, we get 3. Divide by 4, we get 1. And what does that equal? That equals 11/9. And 11/9, if we do the long division, is 1 2/9. 1 2/9. 1 2/9. Can you see that? I think you can. Okay, next one. Next one over. 9/14 times y. It's attached to y by multiplication. So if I want to get y by itself, I'm going to have to do the opposite of multiplying by y, which is dividing by 9/14. And I'm going to do that to both sides of the equation. I'm going to divide both sides by 9/14. On the left side here, the multiplying and the dividing of 9/14 cancel each other out, leaving me with y. On the right side, I've got to do that rule about division. To divide, we multiply by the reciprocal of the second number. And I can do a lot of simplifying here. Divide by 3, divide by 3, divide by 7, divide by 7. And what do I get? I get a y value that's equal to 2/3 when I'm all said and done there. 1 times 2 is 2. 1 times 3 is 3. Get a y value of 2/3. Ooh, this next one's an easy one, even though it might look hard. What's the opposite of dividing by 2.6? Isn't the opposite of dividing by 2.6 multiplying by 2.6? And don't I have to do that to both sides, right? And over here, the 2.6 that you divide by and the one that you multiply by, they cancel each other out, leaving you with m. And over here, we end up with a negative 13 as our value of m. Negative 13 as our value of m. How about this next one? N is attached to 5 by division. What's the opposite of dividing by 5? Isn't it multiplying by 5? So I'm going to do that to both sides of the equation. And when I do that, I get an n value that's equal to 3. And finally, my last problem. X divided by 2.6. How am I going to get rid of this 2.6? What's the opposite of dividing by 2.6? Isn't it multiplying by 2.6? And aren't I going to do that to both sides of the equation, giving me an x on this side, because these two cancel each other out, equaling whatever that is. And I don't have a clue what that is, so I'm going to have to do some multiplying here. I get a negative 3.38 when I do the math on that one, a negative 3.38. Okay, hopefully this helps. Ooh, that's a long video.